The room has not decided whether it is empty or occupied. Dust drifts in a thin, reluctant spiral, turning the last of the daylight into a slow, colorless snowfall. The abandoned cannery on the Coquille River holds its breath the way a bad memory does, refusing to fade, refusing to sharpen. Metal ribs, wooden slats, windows scabbed with plywood. The place looks like a rib cage with a board nailed across its heart. Time moves here, but only sidelong. The sound is the river. The smell is iron and damp paper. The feeling is a cold that settles under the nails and waits. He stands just inside the threshold, letting his eyes adjust. They always talk about returning to the scene, as if the scene were a place that exists outside of a body's inventory of failures. He calls it something else, a corridor where choices echo. 35 years ago, he was new enough to believe that a good pair of boots and a careful notepad could keep a life from emptying itself onto a concrete floor. 35 years ago, the floor had a dark bloom he tried not to step in. She was Leda Morrell, 27, hydrology technician for the state, the sort of person who knew how to pronounce the names of tributaries and would gently correct you without making you feel small. Foster homes, 2 of them decent. 1 scholarship badly photocopied, pinned to a corkboard with a pushpin shaped like a plastic raindrop. A second-hand Honda with a red fender and a black hood, reliable as long as it wasn't hot out. She wore a watch with a cracked face that still kept exact time. She liked white coffee mugs with thick rims. She liked the old logging maps folded to impossible geometry and tucked into her jacket like they were secrets. On the last day anyone saw her alive, September 12, 1990, she left a stack of water-level charts at her desk and told a coworker she had one last check at the cannery easement. She did not come back. They found her the next morning where the loading ramp met the floor, as if she had sat down to listen to something and then forgotten how to stand. The pathologist said the blow was precise, more mechanic than rage. The case gathered shape and then lost it. A typewritten binder swelled with timelines and then sagged under their own polite contradictions. Rumors did what rumors do, moving like fog across the river and making every light look farther away. He walks the perimeter as he did that first week, slower now, counting breaths when he bends, counting splinters when he rises. On the north wall, the faint oval where a clock once hung. On the south, a row of bent nails that once held slickers. The center floor still remembers the chalk outlines, though they have been mopped and mopped again by rain leaking through the seam in the roof. The air tastes of oxidized tin and the persistent sweetness of old paper, ledgers and manifests long since eaten by mice. He does not touch the post that used to be sticky. He does not say her name aloud, because the room already knows it. Detective, the uniform at the door, does not step inside, young enough that the dimness makes him cautious. You need more light. No, he says. It comes out flat. He would call it restraint if he believed restraint was a virtue, and not simply the body's way of refusing to admit what it knows. He has learned that you see different things in a poor light, things that pretend to be edges and turn out to be shadows, and things that pretend to be shadows and turn out to be the beginning of a line. In his pocket, the polished coin of habit, an old locker key stamped with a number he has not forgotten. He turns it once, twice. He makes himself stand where the photographs were taken. He marks the angle by the notch in the railing. He listens. 35 years later, the building still drips. 35 years later, his throat still tightens at the quality of quiet that follows a blow. She had wanted to map the river better. There is a note in her file about the way sandbars shift after heavy trawler traffic. She had told a friend, "It's like the river hides what we keep trying to measure." That line sits at the top of one of his reports like an epitaph he could never justify writing. In the months after her death, the town held pancake breakfasts for the foster home that gave her a good start. The supervisors took a photograph by the courthouse hydrangeas and said the word closure, as if it were a leashed dog they could walk past reporters. He wrote, "No forced entry and blunt force trauma and lack of defensive wound suggests," and none of it told him who had held the instrument or why they had aimed for the temple instead of any other available place on a human head. Dust lands on his sleeve with the softness of a truce. The river shifts its tone. He looks at the seam of roof and imagines a single drop letting go. The room is a held breath. He is too. Sometimes the only honest opening to a case is not a fact but a texture. The way mildew keeps its shape even when you scrape it away. The way a single misfiled page can hold the weight of a decade. He tells himself he is here for the geometry, not the ghosts. He tells himself that if he stands quietly enough, the room will finally return something he left behind. The outline of a mistake, the small hinge on which the whole door turned. He waits. The light thins to pewter. The cannery keeps its counsel. The case remains unsolved. And yet in the way the air gathers in his chest, he can feel it. A pressure change before weather, something moving upriver with purpose, a new edge cutting into the old silence. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. It begins with a cardboard box that should not have existed. Property Room C, third shelf down, mislabeled MORRIS LEON traffic. The clerk swears she didn't shelve it. The handwriting is wrong, the tape too neatly torn. Inside, a Ziploc with a faded Polaroid, a manila folder with a water-damaged corner, and a cassette in a hard plastic case with a cracked hinge. The box smells like a garage sale on a wet day, cardboard, cloth, a sweetness that suggests something once spilled. The Polaroid is the kind that never learned subtlety. Flash burns the near plain white, shadows pool into near black. It is a shot of the cannery's west wall taken at night. The reflective strip on a safety sign throws back a dumb, bright rectangle. The rest is suggestion. But at the edge, right where the sliding door meets its track, someone's hand has caught the light. Not a face, not even a whole hand. Just the last 2 digits and the edge of a palm, half-shadowed. The knuckle of a ring finger bearing a thin, pale groove where a ring is not. He writes it down anyway. Ring absent, line present. He has learned to respect what lives in the margins. The manila folder is a thin version of old authority, state letterhead, crisp signatures, and the strange, bureaucratic poetry of a citation. Easement access variance request denied, padlock to remain under county purview. Tucked behind it, a photocopy of a padlock receipt from a hardware store that closed in 1998. Item, Master 3D High Security Laminated. Date, September 11, 1990. Signature, unreadable, just a hurried loop and a long tail. At the bottom, a carbon transfer of the store stamp shows an address, and a phone number with a prefix that dates it like a coin. He stares at the date. The padlock on the cannery door had been new. He remembers thinking it as he noted the deep shine of the shackle. He remembers assuming the county installed it. He remembers nodding no forced entry, as if the door itself had folded to allow the harm inside. The file suggests otherwise. Someone bought a lock the day before the murder and by the citation, ought not to have. The cassette is labeled in the same careful, non-departmental hand as the box, Sep 12 River Ambient. He feeds it into a machine that still chews tape if you don't coax it with your thumb. The first sound is the river's broad hush, the second a high insect whine, the third a stutter of something mechanical starting and stopping, old refrigeration perhaps, or a pump. Then 3 words, breath soft, close to the microphone, "Don't be long." A woman's voice, not Leda, with a Pacific Northwest vowel that flattens long into a plain plank of sound. In the background, a double knock like metal on metal and the rustle of paper. He plays it again and again. He times the knock spacing with a pencil. He listens for the telltale click of a Polaroid shutter. He does not hear it. He listens for footsteps. He hears one, a shuffle, not a stride. He feels the old floor rise under him as if a tide were moving beneath the concrete. The reopened file gets a new cover sheet. The words "new submission" look both promising and impatient. The district attorney wants a viability memo in 2 weeks. What could be tested? What could be authenticated? What could be fit to the laws that did not exist when they first sealed the case? He writes the memo with the same stance he takes when he re-enters old rooms. Just enough faith to keep him from getting in his own way. Just enough skepticism to keep him from baptizing noise as signal. They send the Polaroid to the lab. Emulsion chemistry has progressed since the decade of big hair and longer silences. The techs scan and isolate, then call to say the shadow gradient suggests another light source outside the frame, something lower than the camera's flash, nearer to the floor, moving. A headlamp? A lantern? They cannot say. The hand at the edge becomes enough pixels to show callus along the ring finger's inner base, pale where metal would normally press. The nail is short, squared, and neatly kept. The groove is unmistakable. The receipt sends him to the Historical Society, where retired clerks flank a microfiche reader like archivist sentries. They unspool old newspapers, scanning for the hardware store, grand closing ad. He finds a name in a photo caption, owner-operator, in Havelock. He hears himself say the name out loud by accident and then does not say anything for a while, because the room is bright and busy and the past feels too near to risk mishandling. The cassette goes to a sound engineer who volunteers for police bands on weekends. She isolates the mechanical stutter, slows it without changing pitch, and pulls out the signature chuff of a diaphragm pump, industrial, mid-century, with a specific flaw that makes the pulse double every 8 seconds. If you find the machine, she says, you'll know it by the hiccup. She also marks the exact second the voice says, "Don't be long," and the precise interval before the double knock, 3.2 seconds. Like a call and response, she says, human to tool. He writes a line that feels dangerous in its smallness. Ring absent line equals occupational. People remove rings for sinks, for gears, for anything that might catch and pull a finger into a machine. People who know machines respect their hunger. People who don't often leave their rings on and call themselves lucky later. The groove on the hand suggests someone who remembers to remove the ring, not someone who never wears one. Someone married or once married, working amid moving parts. The case is open again, but the feeling is not one of doors thrown wide. It is a valve unseized after rust, a careful turn. The river sound on the tape fills his car as he drives back to the Cannery, not because he believes in hauntings, but because the tape is the closest thing to a witness they have. He parks where the pavement dissolves to gravel. Evening makes the windows of the Cannery look wet. He stands at the threshold again and puts the cassette machine in his coat pocket, with the speaker aimed toward the floor. He presses play. The river hush blends with the actual river, present time braiding with recorded time. When the mechanical stutter arrives, something in the building answers, not a sound, not exactly, but a feeling like a room remembering a song. The double knock on the tape arrives, and beyond it, in the belly of the structure, a faint sympathetic tick, old metal acknowledging kin. He notes where he is standing. He notes the angle of the light. He notes the way his stomach drops, gently, as if from a small height. "Don't be long," the woman says in his pocket, and for the first time since that September, he feels something not unlike instruction. 3 investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. He starts with the logbook entries that pretended to be tidy and were anything but. The 1990 roster lists first responding units in the clipped abbreviations of radios and shift boards. H4, K2, Med 1. The timestamps wander. One deputy says 0741. Another swears they arrived at 0753, nodding, fog on river thick as milk. He writes the times in a column and places tide tables beside them. The Coquille was falling that morning. Between 0740 and 0800, the river dropped nearly 2 inches. The damp line on the loading bay post in the crime scene photograph sits just above his kneecap. In another photo, shot 4 minutes later by the file sequence, the damp line sits lower. The room has been telling the truth. They just never learned its language. The photos are not simple records. They are a clock. He goes back to the original no forced entry note, written in his own careful pen, and hates the surety of his own restraint. The padlock had been new. The shackle showed no tampering. The slider's track bore no pry marks. Access by key, he wrote and moved on. Now he spreads the photos like a cheap tarot on the steel table and looks at the lower corners, the places where admin eyes never land. There, a grit pattern on the floor just inside the threshold, 2 arcs like commas catching light. Iron filings, or the fine grit that accumulates when a laminated padlock is cut and disassembles into thin plates on the floor. He remembers the receipt. Master 3D, he remembers the citation saying the county's lock should have remained. He writes, original removed, replacement installed, then cut. Sequence matters if you let it. He moves to witness statements, the kind collected politely from people who were more comfortable with weather than with grief. A fisherman who saw a truck with a ladder rack near the cannery the night before. A kid who insisted a woman was laughing on the dock around midnight. A neighbor who heard a hammer or something like that tapping. He correlates the kid's laughter claim with the cassette's mechanical stutter and sets it aside. Separate nights, different music. The fisherman's truck with a ladder rack matters until he notes the season, fall. Ladders rode every truck as men cleaned roofs before the rains. He lets it go. The neighbor's taps, though, line up. He times them against the cassette's double knock. The neighbor wrote 2 quick taps, then quiet. He underlines quick. The cassette marks 3.2 seconds between voice and knock. How long does it take someone to lean, to set a tool, to test a cut? He hears the shape of a posture in that interval. He goes to the autopsy, not because he needs the violence again, but because the body's geography sometimes corrects the map. Blunt force trauma to the right temporal parietal region, a single blow, oblique angle. No cast-off spatter, the instrument was heavy and controlled. No defensive wounds, fingernails clean. Under the left wrist, a faint square of paler skin, a watch removed not long before death. The pathologist, long retired and recently dead, wrote a parenthetical he remembers admiring. Mark consistent with watch absent no more than several hours. He considers Leda's cracked face watch, found in her desk drawer. He wonders why she took it off. Machines catch watches the way they catch rings. He writes, she arrived, removed watch for safety, never put it back. He flips to the property list, boring as a sermon and for that reason often righteous. One entry shakes loose a dull shock, clipboard with site map not recovered. He had let that line pass 35 years ago because clipboards roam, but if she took her watch off for caution, she would not misplace a site map. He checks Leda's car inventory, no clipboard. He checks her office logs, Morrell working on Cannery seep. The word seep matters. He pulls the county environmental files and finds a complaint receipt from a packing house manager. Smell of diesel on river near abandoned cannery, possible illegal discharge. He had never correlated the environmental complaint with the homicide because the homicide file was its own jealous planet, hard and bright and pulling every thought into its orbit. He overlays maps, the easement, the underground tanks noted in a 1983 survey, the line sketch of a diaphragm pump from an old equipment pamphlet. The pump sits in the drawing beside a tank that would have leaked if it were overfilled or if a seal failed. A pump with a hiccup would betray itself at a regular interval, like a heart with a murmur. He writes a banal, decisive sentence. Someone was moving liquid. Diesel, water, or both. If Leda found someone using the cannery to decant waste back to the river, she would have cited it, called it in, or more likely, taken a sample first. A hydrology tech would want to show the river to a courtroom. For that, she would need her clipboard. He returns to the Polaroid edge hand. In the lab's enlargement, the callus line is not only pale, it is faintly irregular, like a channel that has silted and been dredged many times. Frequent removal of a ring. The nail's squared edges neat, no oil trapped beneath it. The lab notes a tiny crescent scar across the distal knuckle, consistent with repeated nicks from thin-gauge wire. He imagines someone who cuts wire ties by feel, bends cotter pins flat, trims gasket edges with a razor. He searches inspection reports for contractors engaged with pumps or tanks at properties within a 2-mile radius in 1990. A company name recurs, Havelock Industrial Services. The same syllables from the hardware store photo caption. He does not let himself chase it. He only writes it down, patient as if handwriting could restrain hope. The statement that cracks the silence arrives not with drama, but with a yellowed post-it stuck to the inside of a file he'd never had reason to open. County Purchasing. Emergency Expenditures, Autumn 1990. The note is a complaint from a clerk about a missing invoice number tied to after-hours lock service, Cannery Easement 913. That is the morning after the murder, the day they found Leda. The lock service lists a technician's initials only, NH. The invoice includes a terse remark in the service description. Removed non-county padlock, replaced with county lock, original on floor, plates everywhere. The plates. Laminated locks come apart into plates when cut. The grit commas in the crime scene photos. The sequence. Someone installed their own lock to control access the night Leda died. After she died, the county summoned a locksmith to put its own lock back. He calls the retired purchasing clerk. She answers on the third ring, the television murmuring canned laughter behind her. "No one ever asked me about that," she says. "It felt odd at the time. We didn't handle after hours without a supervisor's sign-off, but I was told to expedite and keep my questions to myself." "Who told you?" A pause, not coy, just traveling back through a shelf of mental boxes. Deputy, the one with the red hair, liked to say 10-4 even when he didn't have a radio. She chuckles once without mirth. Said the sheriff wanted it done. The property was supposed to look normal by morning. He writes the deputy's name and underlines it, then draws a lighter line through it. The man died 10 years ago, a stroke that arrived while he was mowing his lawn. The dead cannot testify, but the paper can still point. He circles the initials NH. He circles Havelock. He circles the hand with the absent ring. He draws a line from the cassette's double knock to the service invoices, plates everywhere. Somewhere, he thinks, the missing clipboard holds a sample label with a date and time that would adult supervise all this intuition. Somewhere, a pump with a hiccup still exists, unless someone sold it for scrap. Somewhere, a person with a pale ring groove has learned how to fold their left hand in photographs. He returns to the cannery with a box of past reports, like a doctor carrying a manila armful into a room where a quiet patient waits. Afternoon makes the river dull pewter. He follows the cassette stutter to the southwest corner where the concrete floor is hairline cracked and darkened. He kneels. Old chewing gum coins the dirt near the baseboard. A flake of paint comes loose under his fingernail. He closes his eyes and listens for the interval 2 seconds between voice and knock, and taps the concrete lightly twice. The sound blooms up into the ribs of the building and returns, softened. He measures the echo with his breath. He feels the map inside his chest align with the map under his hand, as if 2 transparencies had finally been layered correctly. He opens his notebook. He writes one last line for the day, the sort of line he used to accuse other investigators of mistaking for progress. What we missed was not the weapon. It was the reason a door wanted a different lock. Then he closes the notebook, because some sentences do not forgive being fiddled with, and because the light is thinning again, and because the river always does its best work in the dark. He rises slowly, knees complaining, and leaves the building as he found it, unresolved, listening, exact. He is not ready to say what he thinks, but the room has already started to answer, and quiet admissions are the only kind that endure. The case fractures open like ice. What had once been a single clean wound begins to branch into smaller fissures, each one a name, a motive, a fragment of an alibi rehearsed too many times. 3 individuals emerge from the brittle paper trail, not by coincidence but through quiet repetition in the records. Their initials appearing in invoices, logs, and witness statements like a watermark, only now visible under the right light. 1. Norman Havelock, contractor, 54 in 1990. Owner of Havelock Industrial Services, the same company name scratched into the maintenance report for the Cannery's pump house. A man described in old notes as practical, talkative, likes to fix what isn't broken, married twice, known for working alone after hours. The hardware store photo confirms it. Same surname, same slope of shoulders. His purchase of the Master 3D padlock fits the timeline precisely. September 11, 1990. His alibi: he claimed to have been at a storage facility in North Bend, repairing a sump motor for the fishery co-op. The invoice he submitted has a signature, but the pen pressure changes mid-line and the date looks re-inked. The co-op foreman listed on the receipt died in 1995. No one to verify. When the case was new, that kind of gap was considered inconvenience, not deception. 2. Diane Mercer, Environmental Compliance Officer, 32 in 1990. Leda's supervisor at the Department of Water Resources, a woman with sharp posture and sharper phrasing. She was the one who filed the easement variance rejection that Leda later cited on her field forms. Mercer had reason to keep the cannery sealed. She had been lobbying to shift state responsibility away from private waste sites. A contamination scandal would have ruined her funding proposal. Her statement back then: Leda was meticulous but impulsive. I told her not to visit alone. It sounds almost parental until you read it again 30 years later, and it sounds like rehearsal, a statement meant to distance, not to warn. Mercer left public service the following year, joined a consultancy that handled industrial cleanup contracts. One of her early clients, Havelock Industrial Services. 3. Deputy Aaron Rusk, Sheriff's Department, 41 in 1990. Red hair, fond of 10-4, fond of closing loops. He authorized the after-hours lock service call the morning after the murder. Rusk's report was minimal, procedural to the point of emptiness. Secured property, replaced unauthorized lock, nothing further. The chain of custody for the padlock fragments ends there. The grid on the floor was swept away under his order. His motive, if it existed, was not personal but systemic. The cannery land was under the county's insurance pool. An industrial homicide there could have led to lawsuits. He might not have killed Leda, but he could have cleaned the scene for someone who did. The investigator's notebook begins to thicken with threads, each held by a different gravity. He does not draw lines between them yet. Instead, he lists what each would fear. Havelock would fear discovery of illegal discharge. Mercer would fear exposure of bureaucratic negligence. Rusk would fear scandal under his jurisdiction. 3 fears, 1 silence. He drives to Coos Bay, to the small diner where Havelock's widow still works weekends. The bell above the door sounds tired. She recognizes his badge, not his face. When he asks about her husband, her expression does not change. Only her hand stops wiping the counter. Norm didn't talk much about that place, she says. He said it gave him headaches, smelled like rust and rain. Did he ever mention a woman, someone from the state? Her jaw works once, twice. He said she was too curious for her own good. Outside, the river fog moves like breath. He writes the quote exactly, then stands by the car longer than necessary, letting the cold do its work. By the end of the week, the district attorney's office compiles a new suspect matrix, 3 columns, 3